Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a truly peculiar corner of ancient history, one that involves slimy creatures and imperial dining tables. We're talking about Roman emperors who loved snails for dinner. Now, I know what you're thinking, snails. For dinner? And not just any snails, but, well, venerated snails, if you can imagine such a thing. You might picture a fancy French restaurant today, with a tiny portion of escargots bathed in garlic butter, looking quite elegant on a white plate. But the Romans took it to a whole other level. They weren't just eating wild snails they found after a rain shower, they were actively farming them. Yep, snail farms, run by the greatest empire the world had ever seen. Sounds appetizing. You'd probably not survive a Roman dinner party without a few raised eyebrows, or at least a very strong stomach. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in, tell me where you're listening from tonight. What's your local time and place as you drift off with tales of imperial gastronomy? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're drifting back, way back, to a time when Rome was the undisputed master of the Mediterranean, a sprawling empire of innovation, conquest, and, incredibly specific culinary tastes. You can almost feel the warm Italian breeze on your skin, carrying faint scents of olive oil, cypress trees, and, if you're downwind from a certain kind of establishment, perhaps a subtle earthy aroma that might make your nose wrinkle just a little. This isn't the Rome of gladiators and grand aqueducts that first springs to mind. This is the Rome of the dinner table, where power was flaunted not just with gold and jewels, but with the most exclusive, and sometimes most bizarre, delicacies. And at the heart of this particular culinary curiosity were snails. Not just any snails, mind you, but gourmet snails, plumped up and prepared with the kind of meticulous care usually reserved for, well, anything but a mollusk. You might be wondering, what's so special about a snail? To us, they're often garden pests, or a niche dish for adventurous eaters. But for the Roman elite, these little gastropods held a surprising amount of prestige. It wasn't just about survival, or even just about taste, though that certainly played a role. It was about status, extravagance, and a display of wealth that would make even the most ostentatious modern billionaire blush. Imagine bragging to your friends about the rare, specially fattened snails you served at your last dinner party. It sounds absurd, doesn't it? But in ancient Rome, this was a legitimate flex. The origins of the snail obsession are, like many things in ancient history, a bit hazy. Historians still debate the precise moment when the Roman palate turned decisively towards these shelled creatures. Was it a gradual adoption from earlier cultures, or a sudden, innovative culinary trend that swept through the imperial city? We know that other ancient civilizations consumed snails, it wasn't a uniquely Roman phenomenon. The Greeks, for instance, were known to eat them. You can almost see an ancient Greek philosopher, deep in thought, absently munching on a roasted snail as he contemplates the nature of existence. Perhaps it was the satisfying crunch, or the subtle flavor, or simply the easy availability in certain regions that first drew people to them. But the Romans, as they often did, took an existing practice and elevated it, or perhaps, in this case, fattened it, to an art form. They didn't just forage for snails, they cultivated them. This wasn't some peasant's meal, gathered from the damp undergrowth after a spring rain. No, these were luxury snails, produced in specialized environments designed to make them as plump and tender as possible. Think of it less like foraging for wild mushrooms, and more like raising wagyu beef, but, you know, for snails. The level of dedication to this particular protein source is genuinely fascinating, especially when you consider all the other delicious foods available in the Roman Empire. They had access to incredible produce, diverse meats, and fine wines, yet they chose to invest so much effort into snails. It highlights a common thread throughout history, the human desire for novelty and exclusivity. Once a food item becomes difficult to acquire, or requires special preparation, its value often skyrockets, regardless of its intrinsic deliciousness. You can almost hear a Roman gourmet lamenting, "Oh, these wild snails simply don't have the genes qua of a properly cochlearium-raised mollusk." It's a bit like comparing a mass-produced coffee to a rare, single-origin bean that's been hand-roasted by a master barista. Both are coffee, but one carries a certain mystique, a story of its own. And the story of the Roman snail is certainly full of mystique. You're beginning to understand that this isn't just about food, it's about culture, status, and the incredible lengths to which people will go to differentiate themselves. As you picture the grand banquets, the flickering oil lamps, and the murmuring conversations, imagine the tiny, carefully presented dishes of plump, prepared snails being brought to the table. For some, it was a delicacy. For others, a display. For you, it's just another fascinating detail from the annals of history, easing you gently into a relaxing slumber. As your mind drifts deeper into the clinking of ancient Roman dinnerware, you might wonder, how did this rather peculiar culinary trend even begin to gain such traction? It certainly wasn't an overnight sensation, like a viral TikTok challenge of eating something bizarre. The consumption of snails, believe it or not, stretches back much further than the Roman Empire, a testament to human ingenuity or perhaps just extreme hunger in finding sustenance. You're not just witnessing a Roman quirk, you're tapping into an ancient, widespread practice that was simply refined by the emperors. Archaeological evidence, often in the form of discarded shells found at ancient settlements, indicates that humans have been eating snails for millennia. From the Stone Age caves of Europe to prehistoric sites in North Africa, our ancestors were clearly not shy about adding these slow-moving creatures to their diets. You can almost picture a group of early humans, huddled around a crackling fire, roasting snails on hot stones, their simple meal providing much-needed protein and calories. It's a far cry from the elaborate Roman banquets, but it highlights the fundamental role snails played in early human survival. The Greeks, those intellectual giants who laid so much of the groundwork for Roman culture, were also quite fond of snails. You might imagine Plato discussing philosophy over a plate of olives, but he might just as easily have been enjoying a side of grilled helix aspersa. They weren't just eating them out of necessity, the Greeks appreciated snails for their flavor and nutritional value. They even developed techniques for preparing them, though perhaps not with the same level of obsessive detail as the Romans would later. This suggests that the Romans didn't invent snail consumption, but rather inherited it, and then, as was their imperial fashion, scaled it up. So, while the precise culinary lineage is debated, it's clear that the Romans weren't just randomly deciding to eat garden pests. They were building upon a long tradition. They were the inheritors of an ancient dietary custom, but with their typical flair for organization and luxury, they transformed it. It's like comparing a simple folk song to a grand opera. Both are music, but one has a far more elaborate production. The Romans turned snail eating into an institution. This brings us to a specific, rather influential figure in the Roman snail saga, Fulvius Lipinus. Now, you might not have heard of him before, but he's essentially the unsung hero, or perhaps villain, depending on your perspective, of Roman gastropod gastronomy. Fulvius Lipinus wasn't an emperor, or a general, or even a famous philosopher. He was, as best as historians can tell, a shrewd Roman entrepreneur, living in the 1st century BCE. He's the one who took snail consumption from a casual habit to a commercial enterprise. Imagine the lightbulb moment: why just forage for snails when you can farm them? It's the kind of entrepreneurial spirit that drives modern businesses, but applied to, well, snails. Lipinus recognized the potential for profit in cultivating these creatures, turning them into a specialized delicacy for the burgeoning Roman elite. He wasn't just a farmer, he was a pioneer, establishing the first known snail farms, or cochlearia. You can almost hear him pitching his idea to a skeptical Roman investor: think of the demand, sir. Plump, grain-fed snails, available year-round, not just after the rains. His innovation wasn't just about quantity, it was about quality. Lipinus understood that to turn a humble snail into a luxury item, you couldn't just serve them as they were. They needed to be pampered, fattened, and prepared to perfection. It was an early form of gourmet animal husbandry, if you can call it that. He realized that the taste and texture of the snail could be vastly improved through controlled feeding and environment. This level of dedication to a humble creature is truly astounding, and it speaks volumes about the Roman obsession with fine dining and pushing culinary boundaries. Historians still debate the exact techniques Lipinus employed to achieve his famous fattening results. Was it a secret blend of herbs, a specific type of grain, or perhaps just optimal temperature and humidity in his cochlearia? What we do know is that his methods were effective enough to create a sensation, elevating the snail from a common foodstuff to a coveted delicacy. You're now seeing how a seemingly insignificant creature could rise to such prominence in the Roman diet, all thanks to one man's entrepreneurial vision. It makes you wonder what mundane item today could become tomorrow's luxury, right? Maybe a perfectly cultivated houseplant? Probably not as tasty though. So, you've got this entrepreneur, Fulvius Lipinus, who's decided that the future of Roman fine dining isn't just in lavish banquets, but in the humble snail. And he's not just catching them in the garden. Oh no, he's building dedicated snail farms, the cochlearia. You might be picturing something elaborate, like a modern-day high-tech vertical farm, but in miniature, for mollusks. The reality was a bit more earthy. Imagine large enclosures, perhaps made of brick or stone, often with a perimeter ditch filled with water. This wasn't just for aesthetics, it was a clever way to keep the snails from escaping their luxurious new homes. Think of it as a low-tech, ancient version of an electric fence, but for creatures that move at, well, a snail's pace. Within these enclosures, there would be carefully prepared soil, often enriched with calcium, which is vital for strong shells. It's like a calcium supplement for tiny, shelled livestock. You can almost hear a Roman snail farmer grumbling about the price of good bone meal for his little charges. But the real secret, the gourmet touch, lay in what they fed these snails. This is where Lipinus truly earned his reputation. He developed specific fattening methods, turning slim, wild snails into plump, juicy delicacies. The primary diet consisted of spelt, a type of wheat, and aromatic herbs. Imagine snails munching on a delicious, herby grain mix, living their best lives before, well, becoming dinner. It's a bit like giving your prize-winning pig a special diet of gourmet truffles before the county fair. Except, for snails. Some accounts, notably from the Roman writer Pliny the Elder, who, let's be honest, wrote about everything, mention that snails were even fed new wine boiled down, which essentially creates a sweet, thick syrup. Think of it as a snail-sized, Ancient Roman port wine. Imagine the flavor profile. A snail that tastes faintly of sweet wine and herbs. It sounds almost intriguing, doesn't it? Though I'm not sure it would pass muster at a modern Michelin star restaurant. But hey, when in Rome, right? These carefully controlled diets weren't just about making the snails bigger, they were about influencing their flavor and texture. A snail fed on bitter leaves might taste different from one nurtured on sweet spelt and wine. It's a sophisticated approach to animal husbandry, demonstrating a deep understanding of how diet impacts the final product, long before modern agricultural science. Historians still debate the exact proportions and combinations of these fattening feeds. Was there a secret recipe passed down through generations of snail farmers, lost to the annals of time? Perhaps a pinch of this herb, a splash of that wine, all carefully measured to achieve the perfect imperial snail. You can almost visualize the dedicated snail tenders, moving slowly among their pens, ensuring each gastropod was getting its fill, watching for signs of plumpness. It was a laborious process, but the payoff was immense. These fattened snails fetched a premium price, becoming a status symbol among the Roman elite. Imagine being at a Roman banquet, and your host proudly announces, "These are from my personal cochlearium, fattened on the finest spelt and aged grape syrup." You'd have to feign appreciation, even if your stomach was doing flip-flops. The types of snails themselves also played a role. While we might think of a snail as just one generic creature, the Romans were discerning. They cultivated different species, recognizing their unique qualities. There were, for example, the small white snails from Crete, modern-day Rieti, known for their delicate flavor. Then there were the larger snails from Illyricum, roughly modern-day Balkans, prized for their size. And from Africa, they had medium-sized varieties, and even a particularly large, prolific species known as solitani. It's like a sommelier explaining the nuances between different grape varietals, but for snails. This meticulous attention to detail, from the construction of the cochlearia to the specific diets and selective breeding of different snail species, truly elevates the Roman snail from a mere food item to a cultural phenomenon. It wasn't just about putting food on the table, it was about creating an experience, a luxury commodity that showcased wealth, sophistication, and a willingness to indulge in the unusual. You're beginning to see that Roman dining was never boring, even if it involved snails. In fact, perhaps especially if it involved snails. You're now picturing these cochlearia, these specialized snail farms, and the meticulous care given to their shelled inhabitants. But why go to all this trouble for a snail? It wasn't just about the novelty, there was a deeply practical side to this Roman obsession. For the elite, dining was a performance, and the presentation of food was paramount. Imagine serving a plate of humble, wild snails that just crawled in from the garden. It would be, shall we say, unimperial. The act of fattening and preparing snails wasn't merely about making them palatable, it was about transforming them into a luxury ingredient that could be displayed with pride. Think of it like this: you wouldn't serve a wild boar that just ran out of the forest at a state dinner, would you? You'd want a boar that's been properly hunted, dressed, and perhaps even specially fed. The same principle applied to snails. The plumpness, the consistent texture, the nuanced flavor achieved through their special diets, these were all indicators of expense, effort, and therefore, status. And this attention to detail extended to how they were served. These weren't just tossed onto a plate. Archaeological finds and ancient texts suggest that snails were often served with specialized cutlery, perhaps tiny forks or picks, designed to extract the succulent meat from its shell. Imagine the scene: a Roman nobleman, perhaps a senator with a toga draped just so, daintily picking a plump snail from its shell, perhaps dipping it in a rich sauce of garum, that ubiquitous fermented fish sauce, which we'll save for another sleepy history lesson, thank goodness. It's all part of the theater of dining. Beyond the dinner table, the Romans were, in many ways, quite practical people, despite their penchant for extravagance. And even in their appreciation for snails, there were underlying practical considerations. For instance, the sheer nutritional value of snails cannot be overlooked. They are a good source of protein, iron, and other minerals, and relatively low in fat. In an era before refrigeration and widespread meat preservation, a readily available, high-protein source that could be easily farmed was incredibly valuable. It's like a tiny, self-contained protein package, delivered right to your dinner table. You can almost hear a Roman nutritionist, perhaps a very early version of one, touting the benefits of snail consumption. However, the primary practical advantage that allowed snails to become a luxury item was their ability to be farmed and fattened in a controlled environment. This meant a consistent supply, regardless of season or success in foraging. Wild snails are subject to the whims of weather and predation. Farmed snails, on the other hand, could be nurtured to reach optimal size and flavor, year-round. This predictability was a luxury in itself in the ancient world, ensuring that even in the depths of winter, a Roman emperor could still indulge in his favorite gastropod. Historians still debate whether the Roman fascination with snails was driven more by taste, by status, or by sheer practicality. Was it a perfect storm of all three, creating a demand that Fulvius Lipinus was only too happy to fill? Or did the novelty of a farmed creature simply appeal to the Roman desire for innovation and control over their environment? You can almost hear the discussions at a Roman symposium: is the flavor truly superior, or is it merely the idea of the farmed snail that we crave? These ancient debates, whispered across millennia, still echo in our minds as you drift deeper into the peculiar world of Roman dining. It really makes you appreciate the simplicity of ordering a pizza these days, doesn't it? No snail farms required. As you continue to float deeper into the fascinating world of Roman dining, you might find your curiosity piqued by the actual stars of our show, the snails themselves. You've heard about the meticulous farming, the gourmet diets, and the entrepreneurial spirit of Fulvius Lipinus. But what kind of snails were these Romans actually feasting on? Were they just your average garden variety, perhaps a little plumper, or did they have specific species they held in high esteem? The answer, as with much of Roman culture, is that they were quite discerning. It wasn't just about a snail, it was about the right snail. The most famous and probably most consumed species was likely Helix pomatia, often referred to today as the Roman snail or the Burgundy snail. If you've ever had escargot in a fancy French restaurant, chances are you've eaten one of its distant cousins. This large, edible land snail, native to Europe, was prized for its size and meaty texture. Imagine it, a substantial bite, not just a tiny morsel. This wasn't a snack, it was a dish. But the Romans, in their imperial quest for variety and exoticism, didn't stop there. Pliny the Elder, our tireless chronicler of the natural world, mentions other favored species. There were the small white snails from Crete, a region known for its delicate produce. Perhaps these were appreciated for a milder, more refined flavor, a palate cleanser before or after the richer, larger snails. Think of it like comparing a delicate white fish to a hearty steak, both delicious, but serving different purposes on the menu. Then, for those who truly appreciated scale, there were the large snails from Illyricum, a region stretching across parts of modern-day Balkan states. These were notably bigger, a testament to the idea that sometimes, size really does matter, especially when you're trying to impress your dinner guests. You can almost hear a Roman host boasting, "These beauties from Illyricum practically need their own serving platter." It adds a certain theatricality to the meal, doesn't it? And from the vast reaches of Africa, they imported medium-sized varieties and even a particularly large and prolific species known as solitani. The fact that they were importing snails from across their vast empire speaks volumes about the demand and the lengths to which the elite would go for culinary novelty. It's like today's high-end restaurants sourcing ingredients from every corner of the globe. You can almost feel the jostle of amphorae on a Roman cargo ship, carefully transporting live snails across the Mediterranean. The logistics alone would make a modern supply chain manager wince. Historians still debate the exact flavor profiles and textures that Romans associated with each of these distinct snail species. Was it a subtle difference, only discernible to the most refined palates, or were the variations quite stark, like comparing beef to lamb? We might never know the full nuances of ancient Roman snail connoisseurship, but it's clear that they weren't just eating whatever crawled by. They were selecting, cultivating, and even importing specific varieties to satisfy their sophisticated, and sometimes eccentric, tastes. The Romans saw snails as incredibly versatile in their dining. They weren't just a single-purpose ingredient. You might envision them simply as a boiled delicacy, served plain. But no, these mollusks were integrated into the elaborate structure of a Roman banquet. Often, they appeared as gusttatio, the first course, akin to modern appetizers or hors d'oeuvres. Imagine reclining on your dining couch, perhaps admiring the frescoes on the wall, and the first dish brought out is a platter of plump, specially prepared snails. It sets a rather unusual tone for the evening, doesn't it? These snails were served in a myriad of ways. They might be roasted in their shells, perhaps over hot coals, imparting a smoky flavor. Or they could be boiled and then fried, sometimes in olive oil with a sprinkle of herbs and spices. And, of course, no Roman dish was complete without garum, that pungent fermented fish sauce that seasoned almost everything. Imagine a snail, hot from the pen, dipped into a rich, salty, umami-laden garum. It would certainly be an assault on the senses, in the most Roman way possible. You can almost taste the complex, earthy, and fishy notes swirling together. Don't worry, it's just your imagination drifting. Sometimes, snails were even stuffed. Yes, you heard that right. Imagine a snail shell, no longer housing the mollusk, but instead filled with a mixture of finely chopped herbs, breadcrumbs, and perhaps a touch of liquamen, another form of garum. It's a bit like a tiny, savory dumpling, served in its own natural bowl. This level of culinary artistry for a snail speaks volumes about the Roman dedication to gastronomy. They weren't just eating, they were creating. Historians still debate the most popular preparation method for snails among the. As you continue to envision the grand Roman feasts, replete with exotic dishes and the ever-present snails, you might begin to grasp the sheer audacity of Roman dining. These were not simply meals, they were elaborate performances, spectacles designed to impress, entertain, and solidify social hierarchies. And in this grand theater of food, the humble snail played a surprisingly significant role. It wasn't just a side dish, something an afterthought. The presence of meticulously farmed and prepared snails, often served as the gusttatio, the appetizer course, set the tone for the entire meal. Imagine yourself as a guest, reclining on your lectus, dining couch, perhaps chatting with your neighbors about the latest political gossip. Then, the first course arrives, a beautifully presented platter of plump, glistening snails, perhaps still in their perfectly cleaned shells, or perhaps artfully arranged with herbs and sauces. It's a subtle flex, a quiet declaration of the host's wealth and sophistication. These weren't just any snails you could find by turning over a rock in the garden. These were the cochlei from Fulvius Lipinus's renowned farms, or perhaps even rarer, imported varieties from distant corners of the empire. The very fact that these snails had been specially bred, fed on a diet of fine spelt and boiled wine, and then transported to the urban centers, added immensely to their prestige. It's like today's obsession with organic, locally sourced, or impossibly rare ingredients. The story behind the food adds to its allure, doesn't it? Serving snails at your cena, dinner party, was a clear signal of your economic standing. Only the wealthy could afford to cultivate or acquire these specialized creatures. Think of it as the ancient Roman equivalent of serving caviar or truffles today. It's not just about the taste, it's about the demonstration of disposable income and refined taste. You can almost hear the whispered conversations among guests. Did you see those snails? From Illyricum, I hear. Simply divine, and so exclusive. The higher the cost and the greater the effort involved in acquiring and preparing the ingredient, the more impressive it became. Furthermore, the act of consuming snails, especially the larger varieties, required a certain finesse. As mentioned, specialized tools might have been used. This added another layer to the performance, demonstrating not just wealth, but also cultural refinement and mastery of the dining etiquette. You wouldn't want to be the barbarian at the table fumbling with your snail, would you? It's a gentle reminder that even seemingly simple acts like eating could be laden with social meaning in ancient Rome. Historians still debate whether the actual flavor of these fattened snails truly justified their extravagant status, or if it was predominantly a matter of showmanship and conspicuous consumption. Was the wine-fed snail really that much better than a regular snail, or was it the story of the wine-fed snail that made it so desirable? It's a question that plagues many luxury goods throughout history, isn't it? The true value often lies as much in the narrative as in the intrinsic quality. This brings us to the emperors themselves. While many Romans of means would have indulged in snails, it was the emperors who truly elevated this culinary trend to an art form, or perhaps a mild obsession. You might think of emperors as being preoccupied with wars, politics, and building grand monuments. And they were, of course. But they were also human, with human appetites and a need to project an image of unparalleled power and luxury. And what better way to do that than with the most exclusive, and sometimes oddest, foods? While no Roman emperor is solely famous for their snail consumption in the way, say, Nero is famous for his musical pursuits, or lack thereof, historical accounts suggest that these delicacies were certainly part of the imperial menu. Take for example, Vitellius, an emperor known for his gargantuan appetites and legendary feasts. His short reign was marked by an almost unbelievable dedication to gluttony. He was said to consume 4 meals a day, often featuring incredibly expensive and exotic dishes. It's not hard to imagine plump, wine-fed snails featuring prominently at his table, a testament to his boundless indulgence. You can almost picture Vitellius, a man of considerable girth, reclining on his couch, perhaps sampling a particularly large snail from Illyricum, savoring its rich flavor. For him, every meal was an opportunity to showcase his imperial power and disregard for expense. The snails weren't just food, they were edible symbols of his absolute authority and unchecked desires. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? How something as small as a snail could become wrapped up in the grandiosity of imperial power. So, as you slowly drift further into the history of Roman indulgence, remember these fascinating creatures and their peculiarities. As you're now well versed in the Roman passion for plump, carefully prepared snails, it's time to shift our focus slightly from what they ate to how and when they slept. Because, believe it or not, the Romans had a rather peculiar sleep schedule that might make your modern, uninterrupted 8-hour slumber seem incredibly luxurious. You're about to discover that even rest, for the Romans, came with its own set of historical peculiarities. Forget the idea of going to bed at 10 p.m. and waking up at 6 a.m. That's a relatively modern invention, tied closely to industrialization and artificial lighting. For most of human history, and certainly for the ancient Romans, sleep was a biphasic experience. That means they slept in two distinct shifts, a practice that was quite common in pre-industrial societies and is often referred to as segmented sleep or bimodal sleep. You might even be thinking, wait, so they just woke up in the middle of the night? And the answer is, yes, absolutely. Imagine yourself in a modest Roman home, the oil lamps long extinguished, leaving the interior bathed in the soft glow of moonlight filtering through a window, or the deep, encompassing darkness of a moonless night. You would typically go to bed shortly after sunset, perhaps around what we'd call 8 or 9 p.m., for your first sleep, the somnus or concubia nox. This initial sleep period would last for a few hours, perhaps until midnight or shortly after. And then, you'd wake up. Just wake up. Not because your alarm clock went off, or because you heard a strange noise outside, but because that was just how sleep worked for them. This waking period, sometimes called the sacred watch, could last for an hour or two. You might think, what on earth did they do during that time? And that's where it gets truly fascinating. This middle of the night waking period wasn't seen as an inconvenience or insomnia. It was a perfectly normal, even productive part of their day. People used this time for various activities. You might rekindle a small lamp or fire to provide a gentle glow. Then, you could use this quiet, uninterrupted time for reflection, prayer, or quiet contemplation. Imagine the peaceful solitude, the world outside hushed, allowing your mind to wander freely without the distractions of daylight. It sounds rather meditative, doesn't it? Almost like a built-in mindfulness practice. For some, it was a prime opportunity for productive work that required concentration. A scholar might read or write by lamplight. A craftsman might prepare materials for the next day. A servant might perform household duties that didn't require light or could be done with minimal illumination. You could even visit neighbors, though that might be pushing the relaxing vibe a bit. Oh, sorry to wake you, just popping by for a quick chat during my midnight wakefulness. And for others, it was a time for social interaction, believe it or not. Family members might chat quietly, share stories, or even engage in more intimate activities. It truly paints a different picture of ancient life, where the rhythm of the day was dictated not by clocks and artificial light, but by the natural ebb and flow of sunlight and human biology. This was truly a natural human sleep pattern before the advent of widespread artificial lighting pushed sleep into a single, consolidated block. After this period of wakefulness, you would then return to bed for your second sleep, the secunda somnus, which would last until dawn. This second sleep was often described as deeper and more restful, preparing you for the day ahead. You can almost feel the gentle weight of sleep pulling you back down after your midnight interlude. Historians still debate the exact social implications and cultural significance of this segmented sleep pattern. Was it truly universal across all social classes? Did the wealthy, with their access to more artificial light and servants to tend to their needs, still adhere to it as strictly as the poor? Or did their lifestyles allow for a more consolidated sleep, pushing them closer to our modern pattern? What's clear is that the very concept of insomnia as a problem was likely very different for them. Waking up in the middle of the night wasn't a disorder, it was just Tuesday. This Roman sleep schedule, so different from our own, offers a fascinating glimpse into a lifestyle intimately connected with the natural world. It underscores how much our modern habits are shaped by technology and societal norms, rather than purely biological imperatives. As you picture Romans waking in the quiet of the night, perhaps reflecting on their day, or simply enjoying the stillness, you might find yourself wondering if there's something to be learned from their ancient rhythm. Perhaps a little midnight contemplation wouldn't be so bad after all. So, you've just experienced the Roman version of a peaceful night, complete with a natural midnight interlude for quiet reflection or even some light chores. But what happens during those hours of darkness when your mind truly lets go? For the Romans, as with many ancient cultures, dreams were far more than just random neurological fireworks or the product of that heavy snail dinner you just imagined. Oh no, dreams were seen as potent messages, sometimes from the gods themselves, sometimes as omens of the future, or even insights into your own physical and mental state. Imagine waking up from your first sleep, perhaps during that quiet, liminal time between midnight and dawn, and immediately pondering the vivid images that just played out in your mind. Was that dream of a soaring eagle a sign of good fortune? Or did that terrifying vision of a crumbling building foretell disaster? The Romans took these nocturnal journeys very seriously, often seeking to unravel their hidden meanings. This wasn't just a casual tell me about your dream conversation, it was a profound act of divination. They even had dedicated dream interpretation manuals, much like ancient versions of What Your Dreams Mean books you might find today. These were often compiled by scholars or priests and listed various symbols and their presumed interpretations. For example, dreaming of a flourishing garden might indeed signify prosperity and growth, much like it did for the Egyptians we discussed previously. But a dream of falling teeth, a surprisingly common and unsettling dream even today, could be a stark warning of impending misfortune or the loss of loved ones. You can almost see a Roman citizen, poring over a papyrus scroll by the dim light of an oil lamp, desperately trying to decipher the cryptic messages of their unconscious mind. Professional dream interpreters also existed in ancient Rome, much like modern therapists or fortune tellers, but with a distinct mystical bent. If you had a particularly vivid, disturbing, or potentially prophetic dream, you might seek out one of these specialists, eager for their wisdom to unravel its hidden meaning. These interpreters weren't just guessing, they relied on established traditions, symbolic associations, and perhaps even a keen understanding of human psychology, albeit through an ancient lens. They would listen intently, perhaps ask about your waking life, and then consult their knowledge to provide guidance or a warning. It adds a whole new layer of importance to bedtime, doesn't it? No more hitting snooze and groggily forgetting what you dreamt. Historians still debate the extent to which the Roman elite genuinely believed in the literal interpretation of every dream versus using dream reports as a rhetorical tool or a way to influence public opinion. Did emperors truly alter their plans based on a bad dream, or was it a convenient excuse to avoid an unpopular decision? What's clear is that dreams held enough cultural sway that they were frequently recorded in histories and biographies, particularly those of the emperors, as portents of their destinies. The lives of emperors like Caligula or Nero were often punctuated by reported dreams and omens, giving them a certain mystique or foreshadowing their fates. Consider the famous example of Julius Caesar's wife, Calpurnia. On the night before Caesar's assassination on the Ides of March, she reportedly dreamt that she saw her husband stabbed in her arms and that a part of their house collapsed. She implored him not to go to the Senate that day. While Caesar initially dismissed her fears, he was swayed by her pleas and the ill omens reported by others. Though he ultimately went, and met his fate, this popular historical event highlights the real-world impact that dreams, or at least the belief in their significance, could have on even the most powerful figures in Rome. It's a chilling thought, isn't it, that a dream might have literally changed the course of history, even if only for a few hours? Beyond the purely prophetic, dreams were also considered important for healing and well-being. In some cases, people would even undergo a process of incubation, similar to what we saw in ancient Egypt. This involved sleeping in specific sacred locations, often temples dedicated to healing deities like Asclepius. The hope was that the god would appear in their dreams, offering a diagnosis or a cure for their ailments. Imagine yourself lying down in a quiet temple, surrounded by the murmur of prayers, hoping for a divine visitation in your sleep that would restore your health. It's a fascinating blend of faith, medicine, and the mysterious power of the unconscious mind. This deep engagement with the dream world meant that sleep was not just a passive state of rest, it was an active portal to other realms of understanding. It makes you wonder, if your dreams were considered so significant, would you pay more attention to them? Would that we? Having explored the Romans' peculiar sleep cycles and their earnest engagement with dreams, it's only natural to wonder, how did all this fit into their broader understanding of health and well-being? In an era long before modern medicine, the connections between diet, sleep, and overall health were often understood through observation and philosophical reasoning rather than scientific study. And you might be surprised at how some of their ancient wisdom still resonates today. While they didn't have detailed nutritional charts or sleep labs, the Romans certainly recognized the importance of moderation and balance in their lives. The wealthy, with their access to incredibly rich and varied diets, including those famously fattened snails, were often cautioned against overindulgence. Excessive eating and drinking, particularly at elaborate banquets, were known to lead to various ailments, from indigestion to more chronic conditions. You can almost hear a stern Roman physician advising a bloated senator, perhaps less peacock-tongued tonight, my friend, and more modest fare. Sleep, too, was seen as crucial for physical restoration. Even with their segmented sleep pattern, the quality of rest was valued. A restless night, perhaps plagued by disturbing dreams, which, as we just discussed, they took very seriously, would be seen as detrimental to one's health and even a bad omen for the day ahead. Conversely, a night of peaceful, if segmented, slumber was believed to refresh the body and prepare the mind for its daily tasks. It's a very human understanding, isn't it? That feeling of waking up truly rested, ready to face the world. Now, connecting back to our snails, while they were a luxury, they were also a source of protein. In a diet that often relied heavily on grains and vegetables for the common folk, protein sources were valuable. For the elite, consuming snails might have been a way to add variety and nutrients to their already opulent meals, even if the primary driver was status. Historians still debate the extent to which the Romans consciously linked specific foods to health benefits, beyond general observations. Was the consumption of snails a purely hedonistic pursuit for the emperors, or did some genuinely believe in their purported health advantages, perhaps as a gentle stimulant or a digestible protein? The ancient world, including Rome, often saw a holistic connection between mind, body, and spirit. Illness wasn't just a physical malady, it could be influenced by one's emotional state, divine displeasure, or even bad dreams. This explains why dream interpretation and rituals in healing temples, like those dedicated to Asclepius, were so intertwined with their approach to health. You wouldn't just take a potion, you might also seek a divine message through sleep to guide your recovery. The emphasis on cleanliness and hygiene, particularly among the wealthy, also played a role in their overall well-being. Regular bathing in public baths wasn't just a social activity, it was a way to maintain physical cleanliness, which they understood to be important for health. Imagine the soothing warmth of the Roman baths, easing tired muscles after a long day of imperial duties or intense philosophical debates. It certainly contributes to a more relaxed state, setting the stage for better sleep. Furthermore, physical activity was a part of daily Roman life, from military training to public games and even simply walking through the bustling streets of the city. A body that is physically active often sleeps better, a fact that transcends millennia. You can imagine a Roman legionary, tired after a long march, falling into his first sleep with relative ease, despite the hard ground or simple cot. Their rigorous physical demands often ensured a more profound, albeit segmented, rest. However, the Roman diet, particularly among the wealthy, was not without its pitfalls. Lead poisoning from lead pipes and cooking vessels, rich sauces, and heavy consumption of meat and wine could all contribute to health issues. So, while they might have enjoyed the protein from their fattened snails and benefited from their segmented sleep, their overall health landscape was complex, a mixture of beneficial practices and unknowingly harmful ones. It's a reminder that even in seemingly simple aspects of life, like diet and sleep, there were hidden complexities and unintended consequences. You might think your modern health concerns are unique, but history shows us that humans have been navigating these waters for a very long time, often with far less information than we have today. It makes you feel a little more appreciative of your doctor, doesn't it? You've explored the lavish dining habits of Roman emperors and their peculiar preference for snails, the intricate methods of fattening these creatures, and even the fascinating biphasic sleep patterns of the common Roman. But just as today, not all Romans ate alike. The kind of snail you enjoyed, or even if you enjoyed one at all, was a stark indicator of your place in the rigid social hierarchy of the Roman Empire. Imagine the bustling streets of Rome, filled with people from all walks of life. The senator in his pristine toga, the soldier returning from campaign, the artisan plying his trade, and the freedman haggling in the market. Each had a vastly different dietary experience, and the humble snail was a perfect microcosm of this social divide. For the vast majority of Romans, particularly the plebeians, the common citizens, and especially the poor, a snail was probably something you stumbled upon in your garden and cooked out of necessity, or perhaps a small, humble treat. Their diet was largely based on grains, particularly wheat and barley, often in the form of porridge or simple bread, supplemented by legumes like lentils and chickpeas, and seasonal vegetables. Meat was a rare luxury, usually consumed only after a public sacrifice or if one could afford the occasional piece of pork or poultry. You can almost feel the gnawing hunger of a poor Roman, grateful for any sustenance, let alone a specially fed mollusk. So, for them, the idea of a specially constructed cochlearium dedicated to fattening snails with spelt and boiled wine would have been utterly preposterous, a bizarre fantasy belonging to another world. They weren't concerned with the subtle nuances of a snail from Rete versus one from Illyricum. They were concerned with simply putting food on the table, often relying on public distributions of grain or cheap fare from Thermopolia, ancient fast food stalls. Imagine a Roman street vendor, hawking simple bread and bean stew, while across town, a senator's chef meticulously prepares wine-fed snails. The contrast is stark, isn't it? Then you have the equites, knights, and the patricians, the noble elite, the very people who frequented the lavish banquets we've been imagining. For them, food was more than sustenance, it was a display of wealth, power, and social standing. The rarer, the more exotic, the more difficult to obtain or prepare an ingredient was, the higher its prestige. And here, the specially cultivated snail found its rightful place. The elaborate cochlearia of Fulvius Lipinus and other entrepreneurs were built specifically to cater to this upper crust. They weren't just producing snails, they were producing luxury goods. The price of these specially fattened snails would have put them well out of reach for the common Roman. It's akin to the difference between a simple, everyday meal and a multi-course tasting menu at an exclusive restaurant today. Both are food, but one is an experience, a status symbol. Historians still debate the degree of dietary overlap between the social classes in ancient Rome. While the basic staples like bread and vegetables were consumed by all, the quality and variety differed dramatically. Did a common Roman ever get to taste a gourmet snail, perhaps as a small, rare gift from a wealthy patron? Or were these delicacies strictly reserved for the elite, part of a closed circle of indulgence? What's clear is that access to luxury foods, like our pampered snails, was a powerful visual cue of one's social position, a gastronomic badge of honor. You can almost picture the dinner parties, the wealthy reclining on their couches, delicately extracting snails with tiny forks, while outside, the vast majority of Rome's population eats a far simpler, coarser meal. It's a powerful reminder of the profound inequalities that existed within the Roman Empire, where even the tiniest of creatures could highlight the vast chasm between the haves and the have-nots. The taste of a snail, therefore, wasn't just a flavor, it was a social statement. As you absorb the fascinating details of Roman dining and sleeping habits, from the pampered snail to the segmented slumber, it's easy to see how unique their practices were. But were they truly alone in their particular brand of head-resting and mollusk munching? You might be surprised to learn that while Roman culinary and sleep customs had their distinct flair, other ancient cultures across the globe also embraced various forms of rigid headrests and even, yes, consumed snails. It's a reminder that human ingenuity, whether for comfort or cuisine, often converges on similar solutions, even across vast distances. Let's first consider those hard headrests. While the ancient Egyptians are perhaps the most famous for their wooden or alabaster headrests, designed to protect elaborate hairstyles and ward off evil spirits, as you remember, they were certainly not the only ones who preferred a firm foundation for their heads. Far to the east, in places like ancient China and Japan, rigid headrests were incredibly common, often made from materials that would make your modern neck cringe. Imagine waking up in ancient China to find your head resting on a pillow made of porcelain, ceramic, wood, or even jade. Sounds about as comfortable as a brick, doesn't it? These weren't soft, fluffy cushions by any stretch. The Chinese believed that soft pillows could actually sap energy and vitality from the body during sleep, and they were also considered less effective at warding off evil influences. So, a hard pillow was not just practical, it was thought to be beneficial for health and spiritual well-being. Some even believed that specific materials, like jade, could cool the head and improve eyesight. You can almost hear an ancient Chinese scholar recommending a hard ceramic pillow for brightening the eyes and benefiting the pupils. It's a far cry from memory foam, isn't it? Similarly, in Japan, particularly among the upper classes and those with elaborate hairstyles, like geishas, wooden headrests were essential. Their primary function was precisely what you'd expect, to keep intricate coiffures perfectly intact overnight. Imagine spending hours on a gravity-defying hairstyle, only to smash it flat with a soft pillow. Unthinkable. These Japanese headrests often had a small, soft pad on top of a wooden base, providing just enough cushioning to prevent severe discomfort while still preserving the artistry of the hair. It's a pragmatic solution born from a dedication to aesthetics. So, While the Roman hard headrest for wigs was more about posture during the day than during sleep, the principle of using rigid supports for the head was not exclusive to Egypt. It spanned continents, driven by different cultural needs, be it spiritual protection, health beliefs, or the preservation of fashion. Historians still debate the extent to which these parallel developments were independent innovations versus ideas that slowly diffused along ancient trade routes. Did a Roman traveler ever encounter a porcelain pillow and think, now that's dedication to a good knight's, well, a good knight's head support? Now, let's turn our attention back to the snails. While the Romans certainly made a culinary art form out of them, they were far from the only culture to consume these mollusks. As we briefly touched upon, the consumption of snails stretches back to prehistoric times across the Mediterranean. Early humans in places like North Africa and Spain were definitely putting snails on the menu, often evidenced by large heaps of discarded shells found at archaeological sites. It was a readily available source of protein. Even today, beyond the classic French escargot, snails are a traditional food in many parts of the world. In some Mediterranean countries, they are still a popular dish, often prepared simply with garlic and olive oil. You might find them in Italian regional cuisines, or in parts of Spain, where they are consumed with enthusiasm. In some African and Southeast Asian cultures, various species of land snails are also traditional food sources. So, while the Roman imperial obsession with fattened snails was peculiar, the act of eating snails was, and remains, a widespread global practice. It highlights how human diets are incredibly adaptable and often shaped by local availability and cultural preferences. What might seem strange or unusual in one culture, like snails for dinner, or sleeping on a stone, is perfectly normal, even esteemed, in another. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? That our modern comfort and culinary norms are just one tiny blip in the vast, diverse history of human experience. You're truly seeing the world through a much wider lens, one filled with fascinating customs and unexpected connections. You've now seen how the firm headrest extended beyond Egypt to Asia, and how snail consumption was a global, albeit varied, phenomenon. So, if ancient cultures were so comfortable with hard headrests and unusual delicacies, how did we ever get to the luxurious, cloud-like pillows you're probably sinking into right now? And how did snails, once imperial delicacies, become more of a niche dish? It's a slow, meandering journey through history, a gradual softening of humanity's slumber and a broadening of its palate, driven by technological advancements, shifts in cultural values, and a growing appreciation for what we now consider comfort. The transition from stone or wood to soft, yielding pillows wasn't a sudden leap. It was a series of incremental changes, almost imperceptible over centuries, even millennia. After the decline of the great ancient empires that favored rigid headrests, the idea of a softer sleeping surface slowly began to take hold in some parts of the world. Enter the Greeks and Romans, those masters of innovation and luxury. While the Romans had their hardish dining couches and the Greeks their stone benches for philosophical contemplation, they were also among the first to truly experiment with more malleable forms of pillows for sleeping. You can almost imagine a Roman patrician, after a particularly heavy meal of spiced dormice and, yes, snails, sighing and thinking, there must be a softer way to rest my weary head. They began to use stuffed bags of cloth, a significant departure from the solid, unyielding nature of stone or wood. These early soft pillows weren't exactly plush. Imagine a sack filled with materials like reeds, straw, or even cotton. This was a revolutionary step, offering a degree of give that was utterly foreign to the rigid headrests of their predecessors. It was the first tentative step towards what we now recognize as a true pillow, a cushion designed solely for comfort. However, These early soft pillows were still a far cry from modern plushness. Sleeping on a sack of hay might offer a little more give than a block of stone, but it wouldn't exactly be cloud-like. You'd probably still wake up with a few stray bits of straw in your hair and a definite crick in your neck. But it was progress, nonetheless, a slow realization that perhaps a little cushioning could be a good thing. It's like discovering that sitting on a cushion is better than sitting on bare stone. Revolutionary, right? The materials used reflected what was readily available and relatively inexpensive. Reeds and straw were abundant agricultural byproducts. Cotton, though known to the Romans, was less common than in the East, making it more of a luxury filling. This meant that even these early soft pillows had varying degrees of comfort and expense, depending on their stuffing. Historians still debate the precise turning points in this evolution. Was there a specific inventor of the soft pillow in the Roman world, or was it a gradual, almost unconscious shift driven by the simple desire for a less rigid night's rest? The shift wasn't just about materials, it was also about changing cultural values. As societies became more refined and focused on personal comfort and luxury, the idea of enduring a hard sleeping surface began to wane in some regions. The focus moved from practical considerations like preserving hairstyles or warding off evil spirits to simply providing a more pleasant and restful sleep experience. Parallel to this softening of sleep, the status of snails in dining also underwent a subtle shift. While they remained a part of various cuisines, the extreme, almost ritualistic, imperial obsession began to fade with the decline of the Roman Empire and its particular brand of extravagant dining. The vast cochlearia that once supplied emperors with their pampered gastropods likely dwindled or repurposed. The knowledge of their elaborate fattening techniques might have been lost, or simply became less relevant in a changing culinary landscape. This isn't to say snails disappeared entirely from European diets, they simply became more of a regional delicacy rather than an imperial status symbol. The pursuit of other, perhaps less laborious, forms of protein and luxury items took precedence. It's a testament to how culinary trends, much like fashion, rise and fall with the tides of history and culture. You can almost picture a medieval peasant looking at a Roman snail farm and scratching their head, thinking, all that for snails. So, as you feel the gentle pressure of your own soft pillow, consider the long, winding path it took to get there. From the unyielding stone of ancient pharaohs to the humble hay-filled sacks of the Romans, the human quest for comfortable slumber has been a slow and steady revolution. And perhaps, in a strange, roundabout way, those ancient Romans, even with their bizarre snail dinners, were laying the very first, softer foundations for your modern-day comfort. As you consider the long, slow march from stone headrests to soft, comfortable pillows, and the fluctuating popularity of snails on the dinner table, you might be wondering, what drove these changes beyond just a growing preference for comfort? One surprisingly significant factor, especially in ancient societies, was fashion and personal grooming. Yes, even something as mundane as a pillow could be deeply intertwined with the elaborate hairstyles and aesthetic sensibilities of the time. Think back to the ancient Egyptians. Their elaborate wigs, often intricately braided and styled, were masterpieces of ancient cosmetology. Imagine spending hours, or even days, meticulously arranging these voluminous creations, perhaps with a hairdresser working on you for what felt like an eternity. The last thing you'd want is to flatten all that hard work by resting your head on a soft, squishy surface. This is where the wooden or stone headrests proved incredibly practical. They cradled the neck, elevating the head just enough to keep those elaborate coiffures pristine overnight. It was less about comfort as we define it, and more about preserving a costly and time-consuming hairstyle. You can almost hear an Egyptian noblewoman sighing with relief, knowing her morning routine wouldn't involve resculpting a flattened wig. Similarly, in ancient China and Japan, where intricate updos and elaborate hair arrangements were common, particularly among the elite and performing artists like geishas, the hard headrest found its enduring purpose. The smooth, elevated surface of a ceramic or wooden pillow was ideal for maintaining complex styles. It was a practical necessity, a tool for preserving an art form worn on the head. Imagine the sheer terror of a geisha, whose livelihood depended on her immaculate appearance, if she had to sleep on a pillow that would crush her painstakingly constructed coiffure. Her specific headrest, often small and elevated, was designed to support the neck while leaving the elaborate hair untouched. Now, fast forward to the Roman Empire. While they were beginning to dabble in softer pillows for sleeping, the concept of fashion influencing head support was still present. Romans, particularly the wealthy, were known for their elaborate hairstyles, especially the women. These styles could involve intricate braids, curls, and even extensions, sometimes requiring a fair amount of work to maintain. While a soft pillow might not completely flatten a hairstyle, a carefully placed, perhaps slightly firmer pillow or a rolled piece of fabric could help preserve its shape. Historians still debate the exact degree to which Roman sleeping pillows were designed with hairstyle preservation in mind, but it's clear that personal appearance was paramount, and every aspect of daily life, even sleep, would have been considered in its maintenance. You can almost see a Roman lady's maid carefully arranging her mistress's head on the pillow, ensuring not a single curl was out of place. Beyond just hair, consider the elaborate clothing and jewelry worn by the Roman elite. A soft, formless pillow might not provide the stable base needed to protect delicate necklaces or intricate brooches that might be worn to bed, or simply left on nearby furniture. A firmer, more structured headrest, or even a simple raised platform, could serve to keep these valuables safe and in place. It's a subtle but important detail that speaks to the confluence of personal comfort, fashion, and practicality in the ancient world. The evolution of pillows, therefore, wasn't just a linear progression towards softness. It was a dynamic process, influenced by prevailing fashion trends, social norms, and the ever-present desire to look one's best, even when unconscious. The hard headrest, for all its discomfort by modern standards, was a vital accessory in a world where appearances, especially for the elite, were everything. It allowed for the preservation of hairstyles that were not just personal adornments but symbols of status and identity. And as for the snails, their culinary journey also reflects shifting fashions and access. While they were a high-status item for the Romans, over time, other, perhaps more exotic or less labor-intensive, delicacies took their place. The Roman passion for snails was a peculiar culinary fashion, one that faded as new tastes emerged and as the vast machinery of the Roman Empire, which facilitated their specialized farming and widespread distribution, began to crumble. Just like a hairstyle, a food trend can rise and fall. You can almost hear a medieval chef scoffing at the idea of serving snails, preferring something more robust, like a roasted boar. The impermanence of even the most ingrained traditions is a gentle reminder that history is always in motion, always evolving, just like the softness of your pillow and the contents of your dinner plate. You've traced the fascinating journey from the unyielding headrests of ancient Egypt to the luxurious pillows you know today, and followed the peculiar rise and fall of snails as an imperial delicacy. Now, as we gently pull back from the intricate tapestries of Roman dining and sleeping, it's time to consider the lasting legacy of these seemingly niche historical facts. What do these peculiar cases tell us about the Romans, and about humanity itself? The Roman obsession with fattened snails, spearheaded by an entrepreneur like Fulvius Lipinus, reveals a profound aspect of their society, a relentless pursuit of innovation and luxury. They weren't content with basic sustenance, they actively engineered new ways to make food more exquisite, more exclusive. This tells you that the Roman Empire wasn't just about military might and grand architecture, it was a civilization deeply invested in the finer, and sometimes stranger, aspects of life. They were, in their own way, the ultimate connoisseurs, pushing the boundaries of what was considered edible and desirable. You can almost see a modern-day food blogger, if one existed then, marveling at the ingenuity of the cochlearia. This dedication to culinary perfection, even for a mollusk, underscores the immense social stratification within Roman society. The mere existence of luxury foods like specialized snails, unattainable for the vast majority, served as a tangible symbol of the elite status and wealth. It was a delicious, albeit slimy, reminder of who held power and who did not. The fact that archaeologists find vast quantities of snail shells at elite Roman sites, but fewer at common dwellings, is a quiet testament to this historical truth. Furthermore, the Roman approach to sleep, particularly their biphasic pattern, serves as a powerful reminder of how deeply our daily rhythms are shaped by technology and culture, not just biology. Before artificial light conquered the night, segmented sleep was the norm for millennia. This tells you that our modern consolidated sleep isn't necessarily the only natural way to rest, but rather a product of societal evolution. It makes you wonder how much of your own daily routine is truly natural versus simply ingrained by modern conveniences. Perhaps that midnight scroll through social media is just your inner Roman trying to have a second awakening. Historians still debate the true impact of Roman culinary practices on the broader European diet. While the specific imperial obsession with snails faded, the very idea of cultivating food for specific gastronomic qualities, rather than just survival, was a significant legacy. The Romans laid groundwork for European agricultural techniques that would continue to evolve, even if snails weren't always at the forefront. Their passion for imported goods and diverse ingredients also foreshadowed the globalized culinary landscape we inhabit today. The very ruins of the cochlearia that archaeologists have unearthed, those ancient snail farms, stand as physical testaments to this unique historical chapter. They are not just crumbling walls, they are windows into a specific moment in time when a humble garden creature was elevated to the dining tables of emperors. These subtle, often overlooked details of daily life provide a richer, more nuanced understanding of ancient civilizations than grand battles or political machinations alone. Ultimately, the peculiar case of Roman emperors who loved snails for dinner and the ancient world's relationship with sleep, offer a profound lesson: history is never boring if you look closely enough at the details. It's in these quirky, unexpected corners that you find the true texture of past lives, the shared human experiences, and the strange divergences that make each era so fascinating. From the way they ate to the way they rested, the Romans continue to offer us endless avenues for sleepy exploration, each one a gentle reminder that our world, too, is full of curious habits that future historians will undoubtedly dissect. It's all part of the grand, sprawling narrative of human existence, and you're now a little more informed about one of its strangest chapters. As we gently pull back from the dusty plains of ancient Rome and drift back to the soft comfort of your own bed, take a moment to truly appreciate the luxury that surrounds you. That incredibly soft, perfectly plump pillow beneath your head? It's not just a cushion, it's the culmination of millennia of human ingenuity, a testament to our ongoing quest for deeper, more restorative sleep. From the cool, unyielding stone of the pharaohs to the soft, yielding foam of your own sanctuary, the journey of the pillow has been a long and fascinating one. Imagine, if you will, the tiny, almost imperceptible shift in human comfort, from a society that found repose on carved rock to one that meticulously engineers the perfect level of plushness. We've come a long way from fearing scorpions on the floor and relying on stone to keep our elaborate wigs intact. Now, our biggest sleep worries might be blue light from our phones or the gentle hum of traffic outside our window. It's a remarkable transformation, isn't it? And perhaps, in a strange, roundabout way,